All right, now joining us to talk on all issues of the week at a slightly earlier time is our guest from Dunedin, former ACT MP, former regional councillor, former city councillor, mayor, so not mayor, lawyer and businesswoman. Hilary Calvert joins us now. Hilary, welcome to the show. I think you're on audio visual today. I can see you, yeah?
Yes.
No, I can't hear her though. I can hear Hilary, she can't hear me.
Yeah.
You need to
I
turn
can hear you.
Oh, you can need to turn your mute button off. Well, there you go. You see, why they give old people like us technology, Hilary, that's beyond me. Hey, listen, very quickly, I'm interested in your thoughts on, in particular, and you raised it with me to chat about today, John Campbell, the, what is it, correspondent at large or whatever he is, chief journalist, I don't know what he is.
Chief correspondent.
Is that
Chief
with a
correspondent.
word? And you say he's got a new gig.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how new it is. It's just that I was minding my own business, as it were, attending Brian Turner's, and I put funeral in inverted commas because there was no body of Brian. It was described as a funeral, but it was what I would usually call a memorial service. Held at
So this is Brian Turner, the poet and writer,
Yes.
who died in Central Otago. Was it early last week or the week beforehand?
Wednesday, the week before, yeah.
Okay. For those of you who don't know Brian Turner, which will be most of New Zealand, he was a relatively, in his lifetime, famous poet. He is a brother, I think the older brother of Glenn Turner, the golfer, Glenn Turner, the cricketer, and who's the golfer?
Greg Turner.
Greg Turner, that's right.
Greg Turner.
And he made a name for himself as a poet throughout his life, and got rewarded for that substantially by the state in New Zealand. But he also now was a leading conservationist and therefore turned out to be rather annoying to the community he was living in. And he died in his, early 80s, was it? Or late 70s?
Yes. 81, I think, round about there.
That's right. And you went to his funeral because, of course, your holiday home is in Oturihura, which is where Brian and his ilk live, yeah?
Yes. And
Right.
Brian had been there for over 20 years, so he was a fixture in the Ida Valley and much loved by the locals, being one of the few people who holds both strong ecological views and can still have a civil conversation with people who don't entirely agree with him, which was refreshing and very pleasant for the locals who didn't entirely agree with him until some creative people came and joined the community, and they did.
And they stuffed it all up.
Yeah. Anyway, if you have a look back to John Campbell for a moment, people were saying, what on earth happened to John Campbell? Or Stuff was saying that because we hadn't heard much from him. And it turned out that he was the chief correspondent for TVNZ, and he did 4 or 5 or something sort of major stories last year, but he's not doing standard. You don't see him popping up on TV all the time at the moment. And they say correspondent very carefully, so not journalist, and no suggestion of lack of bias or anything like that, which I think is good, because I don't think the correspondent has to be unbiased, so it's good that they call him what he is. But people were saying he also does opinion pieces. And should he be doing that if he's also in charge of what might be the newsy sort of part of it, but I don't know, because they do fudge a bit what the chief correspondent might do. So there was a question and Stuff saying, where on earth's John Campbell gone? And should he be doing these 2 roles, opinions and in-depth sort of journalist sort of holding people to account sort of stuff? Well, he's got a 3rd role, and I wonder whether that fits as neatly as he might like it to fit with the other ones. And I can see why major journalists who lose their job are looking for something else. And sort of the media circuit, the giving speeches for money circuit, is, I suppose, a fairly obvious one. but it turns out that if you look up his name, you find that can be hired to give speeches and to do, I'm not sure whether keynote speeches, but speeches at conferences and the like, I suppose, uplifting speeches or whatever speeches you want to pay somebody to give at a conference. And you've got John Campbell coming along and I think this funeral sort of thing was a practice. I suspect he wasn't paid for it. As he arrived, and this is a big lawn full of people at Brian Turner's, and there's no shelter. So I didn't see quite a bit of it because I was hiding behind a bush because it was the only place that had any shade. But as he arrived, somebody asked him, "John, how long are you going to speak for?" And John said 2.5 hours, and my little heart sank because it was rather hot. And if they were paying him for 2.5 hours, I'd have to say they got their money's worth down to the minute. But either way, he knew in advance that 2.5 hours was the time that he was going to speak for. And he provided a very polished performance, and you can see why people might want him to do speeches. He's spent his whole grown-up life as a broadcaster, so he's done nothing else apart from possibly a few months as a share trader, which he said he was dismal at. But the rest of the time, it's all been mellifluous discussions and things on broadcasting. And he did this polished performance, and he had read everything that he needed to about Brian. But because his approach was as a media doing a performance speech, it really was slightly bizarre at a funeral. So he opens by saying, it's delightful to have Brian's son here all the way from London and things. And you don't usually, if you're the chief mourner, you don't usually get invited to and to have the MC, as it were, welcoming you in a delighted fashion to your own father's funeral. It's sort of a bit of a weird thing to do. But
yeah.
The whole thing was sort of quite polished, and it had a whole lot of, I think 9 older male people, none of them locals, making speeches about their own lives, which Brian had touched on, sort of mostly not about Brian, and tone deaf in the sense that there was a sort of like a high table like you might get at a wedding. So there was a little hut, a sort of 2-bedroom to 1-bedroom little place that people are staying on the back of Brian's so as they could look after him as he got sicker. So there's this little thing with a deck out the front. And so the people who are speaking are standing on the deck, and they're under a big umbrella. So here's John Campbell under a big umbrella. And he even says, "I forgot to bring a hat, but I supported the local shop and I bought a hat." So he's under this big umbrella, and when he's finished his little speaking bit, he retreats inside this beautifully, you can imagine, cool little unit. Everyone else is sweltering in the sun. And I'm starting to say half an hour in, if they just closed off the little hut and took that umbrella away, this would not be going to go on for 2.5 hours. But tone deaf, high table crap. And near the end, he decides he should be a wee bit more formal, and he puts his jacket on. And there's mothers and babies who are getting heat stroke outside the front of here. But he's been in this little dark place. What I'd say is, John Campbell, if you're going to do the speaking tour, funerals are probably not your highest and best use. And
read your audience.
It does. Yeah, it was just tone deaf.
Yeah,
and to have everybody sweltering in front of you was just should have been embarrassing to him. But that idea of whether, if you're doing media performances in that sense of doing speeches and things, what do you choose to do? And when you're being employed at Stuff was guessing somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 on the public purse, to be somewhat independent or somewhat of one
No, I think it's a
view or
very
another.
good question you ask. What does John Campbell do? You're absolutely right. He's portrayed as TVNZ's chief correspondent. I think the last, so roughly, he's written 2 pieces this month. One, he went to Waitangi, headlined Waitangi in the Age of the Treaty Principles Bill. So he talked to a whole series of people at Waitangi who were unsurprisingly in favour of the Treaty of Waitangi. And then about 5 days ago wrote another piece called Will Simeon Brown Fix Our Dire Health System? But that's about it. That's the only 2 pieces he's written this year. I haven't seen him on the screens at all, but I'm assuming he went to Waitangi because he had a cameraman trailing him. So maybe that ended up as part of the news that night. I don't know. But yeah, you're right. And obviously he gets paid to go and do his own speaking gigs. Gee, can I just say 2.5 hours for anything is too long, though, isn't it? Seriously, Hilary?
It was far too long, but you wouldn't
Anywhere.
have done that if you
Inside
didn't
even.
have some people protected
Yeah.
and able to not experience what other people were. So he's standing at the front and he's not part of the people. And it's just sort of, if it,
Well, he's
it
royalty.
may work.
Don't be ridiculous. You're hoi polloi. He is royalty.
And one of the funny things was that there was 2 sirs doing speaking. There was Sir Graham Sidney,
Oh yes,
who
the
has
painter.
done books with Brian. So
Yeah.
he's done painting and Brian's done the words. And Sir John Hanson, who is a High Court judge.
Oh,
Don't know
just
how
going to say.
quite where the Sir comes into it.
Yeah. Well,
but
you get one of those automatically if
when-
you hang around the High Court long enough. It's ridiculous. It's a
Well,
deal
I
that they've done.
I don't
It's
know.
apparently
You-
no, it is. I came across this when in the 90s, and I was asking how the bloody hell do these judges end up with knighthoods and damehoods all the time? And they said no, it's an automatic. Apparently there was some deal done 30 or 40 years ago that they wouldn't be paid as much because they get rewarded instead by Queen's or now King's honours instead. So they all end up inevitably, if they're some sort of poobah in the court system, not only getting paid extraordinarily well with chauffeur-driven limousines, but they also get a knighthood or a damehood thrown in as well for nothing. But there
They
you go.
also get the biggest reward they could ever get, which is that they can't be fired, really.